but I still see and saw that basically the messaging of the climate movement itself was failing because the messaging still contained this duality that carbon was something other. It was being separated out from all other aspects of the living world as if it was, I say, a culprit. I wanted to write a book that gave people a sense of awe and wonder about where we live.
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now, the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Welcome back. We are back after winter break. This is Emma, and I'm here with my mom, Mary. For any new Good Dirt listeners, welcome. We have taken a winter break, and we've been replaying old encore episodes, some of our favorites from the archives. And in the background, we've been recording new interviews, and we're excited to be releasing them in the coming weeks. Moving forward, we're going to do every other week a new interview, and then in the in-between weeks, another interview from the archives, because we're finding for ourselves personally, and also we're hearing from listeners that the opportunity to re-listen to old episodes is actually much appreciated, because sometimes we just have so many awesome conversations all in a row, and then, you know what, it's almost like too much to take in. So we're all about slowing down here on the Good Dirt Podcast. And with slow living comes a little bit of, slowing down and slowly releasing episodes. But yeah, lots of things going on in the world. And I'm so glad that we have this podcast to come back to, Mom. And it's really been really fun working with you and continuing to do these great interviews with really cool people. So I'm just so thankful for this project and for all of our listeners for continuing to tune in.
Yeah, we really hope you've enjoyed these last few weeks of encore episodes. I know we have. And as Emma was saying, we found it really valuable to go back and revisit these interviews from the past. Some of them go back maybe a year or so. Some of them go way back. And I think we really find a lot of renewed inspiration from these conversations. And we're recognizing how relevant the topics still are to what's happening right now in the world. So we're going to continue to unearth these episodes. Touching back on these, it reminds us of all the guests we want to circle back to and have on again. And it also gives us ideas for new topics to pursue. So yeah, we've been recording new episodes during the break, and we're excited to be back with a whole new lineup. And today we're coming out of our winter break with a new episode. It's a conversation with a very special repeat guest from last spring. New York Times bestselling author, environmentalist, entrepreneur, and activist Paul Hawken.
Yes, Paul has written several books, 5 of them national bestsellers, including Regeneration, Drawdown, and Blessed Unrest: How the Largest Social Movement in History is Restoring Grace, Justice, and Beauty to the World. And now he's back with us today to talk about his brand new book, Carbon, The Book of Life, which is being released on March 18th. In this work, Paul takes us deep into the world of carbon, exploring this essential element so necessary to life on the planet and so ubiquitous in the living world, singled out in our collective understanding as the driver of climate change, the one element blamed for the possible end of life as we know it.
Yet in this beautiful book, Paul reframes for us the role of carbon in our universe and helps us gain a more holistic understanding of the interconnectedness of all of creation And to quote from his website, asks us to see nature, carbon, and ourselves as exquisitely intertwined and inseparably connected. We both found this book to be deeply moving and profound, and we feel that it's an important book to be out in the world at this moment. And we wanted to bring you this conversation today to give you a chance to pre-order the book before it's released next week. So for more on Paul and his lifetime of work and experience, you'll want to tune in next week for the encore of our first conversation with him from last spring. But for now, here's Paul Hawken, a man of deep wisdom and true vision, back with us again to talk about Carbon, the Book of Life. Paul, welcome back. It's good to have you here.
Good morning.
We had you last year and got to hear so much about your background and your life's work. We talked about so many things. It was a really great conversation, but we're so excited to have you back to talk about your new book, which is going to be out in March. I want to hear about how you came to write this beautiful piece. The scope of it is so comprehensive. What was your inspiration? Were you just one day, did you think, I need to write a book about all of life? How did you get there? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll work backwards in that way. It couldn't include everything. Life is an enduring, incomprehensible mystery. It came about, really, I've been working on the environment since I was a lad, that's been my whole life. But I felt like Bill McKibben, especially, but Al Gore too, in 88 and 89, had really nailed the climate issue with the end of nature and Earth in the balance, So I sort of stayed away from climate. I thought, hey, these two did their homework. So I stuck to all the other issues involved with the environment and a relationship to it, agriculturally, commercially, etc. But I used to read the IPCC reports. When I say read them, I read the summary. Nobody reads the whole thing. It's 4,000 pages. And you could see that they're successively getting more pessimistic. But you also knew that they were watered down because of the Saudis, the Venezuelans, the Americans, the Russians. We're all in there, and they're saying, well, this is consensus. And the thing is, there's no such thing as consensus science. It's evidentiary. It's not about consensus. It's not about coming to an agreement. And so what you saw every time was basically they were hiding actually what most climate scientists would say was really going on and the rate and the rapidity with which things were changing. So I was reading between the lines in 2001, and then 9/11 happened, and I thought everything had changed in the world because of that. I had no idea how. And at that time, I went around talking to people because what I noticed from the 2001 IPCC report, that people didn't know what to do. I felt that when I was talking to people in those organizations, they were talking about net zero. That didn't make sense to me either. The idea of what the goal was so limited. Our goal should be to reverse global warming, not to stop emissions or get to that 0 point, in the future where emissions were counted by sequestration and so forth, that there was a balance. Anyway, I went to institutions. No one knew what to do. They were getting more literate about the problem, of course. And so it was really 2013 when Bill McKibben wrote an article in Rolling Stone, and it was called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math in July. So what he had done to come to that title of an article was take the information that Mark Campanale was accumulating in London at Carbon Tracker. He was looking at the balance sheets of every oil, gas, and coal company in the world and looking at their assets. The assets were the coal, gas, and oil in the ground that they had discovered, that they owned, that is, in terms of the rights to. And what Mark Campanale was saying is, those aren't assets. How could they be assets? Because if we burn them, there's no civilization. So what Bill did in his article is set a match to it. Let's burn it. It was terrifying. It was a brilliant article. That's what prompted me to say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do this myself. And because I didn't know how to do it, it should be done. It was in 2015, staff went to the COP in Paris where they announced the Paris mandate. Before that, they asked people in the blue zone, the green zone, and so forth, what are the 5 top solutions to reversing global warming? People didn't know.
Right.
Almost nobody could name 5. Nobody could name 10. And then what they named was wrong, mostly wrong. They got the renewable energy right. Everybody got that one. But then they said recycling plastic or recycling things that, of course, we should do, but were de minimis in terms of the impact on climate and atmospheric greenhouse gases. And so that impelled us to, wow, this really is needed, because we couldn't find anybody at the conference of the parties who actually knew what the solutions were. So that's what we did. We mapped, measured, and modeled the top 80 solutions to reversing global warming. So that happened. But the thing that came out of that book, and that's been published all over the world and it's taught and people refer to it to this day and inspired businesses. Okay. But we got solutionism. Basically, the idea that carbon was the culprit and that we really had to target carbon. It was being emitted. We had to sequester those emissions, sequester carbon, bring it back home. I don't disagree with that. But the idea that somehow carbon was the problem. So I then knew before I set pen to paper and drawdown, I was going to do regeneration, because you have to stick to your lane when you're writing a book. You start to go off in different things, and I believe you have to stick to your lane if you do a good book, fiction or nonfiction. And so I knew regeneration was not in my lane in that book. So then I wrote Regeneration. This is about how to create more life on the planet, which goes to the real, much deeper source of a solution. I wouldn't call it a solution. It's much bigger than that. But I still see and saw that basically the messaging of the climate movement itself was failing. And it's failing not because it wasn't accurate, not because the people messaging it weren't caring and thoughtful and authentic and sincere. It's because the messaging still contained this duality that carbon was something other. In other words, it was something that we had to combat, tackle, mitigate. These are, these are male verbs, with all due respect to my gender. Women don't go around and talk about, let's tackle and combat this problem. I know, having a twin sister, that they don't. This language comes from the military and from sports and from war. And so I feel like, and there's often people say the war, they use that word about climate, the war, all that stuff. I wanted to take carbon because it was being separated out from all other aspects of the living world, as if it was, I say, a culprit. And then to bring carbon back home in our minds, it's already everywhere. But bring it back as not just the basis of life, which people say, they say that, of course, but it's much, much more extraordinary. I wanted to write a book that gave people a sense of awe and wonder about where we live, just to really introduce what we know about carbon and its ubiquity and what it does, and we don't fully understand it, by the way. The fact that in each cell in your body, there's 1.2 trillion carbon atoms. Just like it's pulling the curtain back on this extraordinary element. They're all extraordinary, but this one in particular is without which we're Pluto. It's a rock. And in space. So that's the origin of Carbon, the Book of Life. And so it was a really fun book to write.
So for me, that's what your book did. It explained carbon in so many ways, and how we can't just say, we need to fix that one thing and then we're okay. Carbon was sort of seen as the bad boy, I think, in our limited understanding collectively of the issues of climate change and what's going on in our atmosphere and in the soil and so forth. The soundbite, oh, we need to sequester carbon. There's too much carbon in the air. And you say, wait a minute, carbon is in everything. We are carbon. Carbon is the connector of all life. And to just extract that issue as the problem that needs solving, oh, we just need to put more carbon into the soil, we'll be okay. It's just a really gross lack of understanding of the holistic picture. So we can't just say, we need to fix that one thing and then we're okay.
Fix is another really great male verb.
Yeah.
I'm not saying women can't do this, but men really love to fix things. I
Yeah.
grew up fixing things. My grandfather
Mhm.
would fix things. I was a carpenter. I was a
Right.
mechanic. So you can't fix it.
Don't you think that's the posture of all these discussions, the corporations, the policies, their efforts to fix a problem? And to order to fix a problem, you have to extract the problem and say, it's this thing. Let's fix this thing.
I had this written in my notes, and I wonder if this is speaking to what we're talking about now, but you wrote in, I believe it was the second chapter, Elements. The climate message is toothless because it is missing the core truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it in my notes that I wanted you to explain that a little bit more to me. What is the core truth? Is that what you're talking about here? That the climate message being that it's a problem we have to fix? And your book is an exploration of that case?
Well, first of all, I go, there is no climate crisis. The climate cannot have a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The climate crisis is a deep installation of duality.
Mm-hmm.
There is a crisis. I'm not saying there's not a crisis.
Mhm.
It's us. It's our behavior. It's what we believe. It's what we've been taught. It's what we do. It's our selfishness. It's our greed. It's our way of seeing ourselves in the world that absolutely is harmful. And people are harming themselves and don't even know it. And they're certainly harming the future, their children, health, the well-being of the planet, and the future of civilization. To say even climate crisis is putting it out there somewhere. We have a climate crisis. Somehow we'll get that right, and then we'll be good to go. Good to go what? To take more, to mine more, to pave over farmland. I mean, that's what we should be talking about. We should go upstream and say, what are we here for? What are we here to do? Our life is very short. And it's just like that compared to the planetary life. Are we here to X, Y, Z? Or are we here to actually have a meaningful life that gives us purpose and sense of worth, which is to restore life on Earth and to support all our brothers and sisters everywhere in the world in such a way that they can lead a life that is kind, that is secure, that is nourishing, that allows them to be good mothers and fathers, or if they're not, just to be good stewards of their cultures and their land and their place, to leave this earth with a sense of having made it a better place. I mean, that's what human beings do, can do, and have done in most cases. So again, about the climate messaging, I understand it. It's a crisis, it's a meta crisis, it's a poly crisis, all these kind of things. But the problem is they're based on fear. And fear is not a good way to get people's attention. It's a good way to get people antagonistic, to migrants. If they're doing this, they're eating cats and dogs in Springfield. Okay. I have a cat. We found it on the beach. It's this big. We wouldn't normally have a pet, and 2 weeks old, and we adore it. So if somebody in the neighborhood was eating cats, I would be really upset. But I'm just saying fear is not going to get us anywhere. And so the book I'm writing now is about just, again, trying to look at it from a different point of view, not opportunistically, to look at it from a different point of view, because I think that the climate messaging, to me, when you think it's less than 1% of humanity does anything on a daily basis about climate after 50 years, especially in light of the fact that we have heating, weather, wind, flooding, drought. We have a backup to what we are trying to say, the climate movement. And even then,
Yeah.
I think less than 1% is doing anything about it at all.
I just really love, can I read a little bit from the book?
Please.
So the way that you end this chapter, which is where this statement about the climate message being toothless, which I just love. You say, can the stock and flow of carbon be tipped in our favor? Yes, if we attend to the entirety of flows, microbes to cells, fungi to plants, farms to kitchens, forests to fields, home to communities, factories to commerce, and governance to culture. To quote Sebastian Junger, the idea that we can enjoy the benefits of society while owing nothing in return is literally infantile.
Mm-hmm.
Only children owe nothing. We need to address what is down here, not up there. The massive rates of resource extraction, wealth concentration, financial hegemony, political corruption, commodification of food, human exploitation, and the absurd, tragic science of economics, which excludes the environment. We owe it to the children to speak to all causes of the crisis, areas that most climate scientists avoid or are hesitant to discuss. So I found this section to be reassuring. It was a clicking moment for me because I love how you encapsulate this as a flow. It's about accessing the flow, observing it, seeing how we can get into it, what flows are set up that are not what we want them to be, how we can adjust that. So I thought that was a really wonderful and reassuring passage.
So that idea of the flow and the connectedness, that to me resonated about the whole work. Everything is intertwined. Everything is connected. We can't separate ourselves and our lives from what's happening in the atmosphere because it has to do with what we eat, how we communicate, all of the plants, the language we use, the soil, all of it is interconnected with this flow. Something you said a minute ago really jumped out to me. This soundbite that will fix the environment if we could just sequester the carbon, if we just eat vegetables, if we stop driving so much. All these things, that is what you just said was the deep installation of duality. That is a fantastic phrase because this duality in our thinking and our consciousness and our way of being on the earth is deep. It is so deep. And I feel like that's the undoing that needs to happen. This book does so much towards that because it evokes emotion, love, and connection. Okay, I cried at the fish story. Tell the fish story, Paul. People need to hear that.
I want to hear you tell it.
Okay, well, I'll tell it. You can fill in. This researcher in Australia, she really loved to hang out at the Great Barrier Reef. She was a diver. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, she was.
And
Monica Galliano, by the
Monica.
way. She's Italian, living in Australia and studying there. An extraordinary woman and scientist.
And she really went in there to study tonality and sound in the ocean. Is that correct? Was that her original intention?
Actually, to see what heating was doing on the Great Barrier Reef to fish and reproductive rates, and to study damselfish,
To damselfish.
Yeah.
So she went there to study the damselfish in the Great Barrier Reef, and she went there every day, and the fish recognized her. She even had physical contact with them. They would swim into her hand.
No, her glove. She
Glove.
wanted to make sure she didn't contaminate them. So she had gloves, but they swam into her glove, and she would close her glove, and they would just sort of nestle inside.
They were snuggling.
Yeah.
And so she went there every day, and she formed a relationship with these fish, a bond. Anyway, part of the experiment or the conclusion of the experiment necessitated that she euthanize the fish and send them off for studies. So the day came when she was supposed to do that, the fish didn't show up. And she knew, they knew
Right.
her intention. That was staggering and really affected me. And then she went back later. The fish were there and she did the deed, and it affected her greatly. And it really was a turning point in her career, because she felt a profound connection to the living world that before, maybe, I don't want to make assumptions on her part, but maybe more of a cerebral thing, like on paper. But with this experience, she got to a new level of understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. And it just really affected me. I feel like I'm personally learning so much right here, just in my old age, and being opened up to so many ideas. But the thing about those fish, understanding and knowing that she was going to harm them, even after they had formed a bond.
Yeah. The story there basically is that she went to the same place every day in the reef for almost 2 months. And they got to know her and trust her and vice versa. Her experience of going the last day was to go in the morning to say goodbye, in a sense, because she knew what she had to do was euthanize them. And she was the one who had to go back and do the dissections and check to see what had happened to their sexual organs because of warming waters. It wasn't somebody else who did it. She had to do that. She finished it. It just startled her, the fact that they knew she knew. This is a beautiful book. It came out as a bestseller, I don't know, 20 years ago. Lawrence Anthony, called The Elephant Whisperer. He had a game reserve in South Africa. And and somebody called him, like, gosh, a long ways away. He had no elephants there. There's no elephants around him in the northern part of South Africa. And said, we have 7 elephants and they're going to be shot because they're really damaging things and breaking the fences and they're angry. He said, if you don't take them, somebody called and said, you don't take them, they're going to be killed. And there's 2 female mother elephants and 5 elephants that were the offspring. And he said, I'll take them. It's a long story of what he did, because they came back hostile, angry. They would charge him, just very, very angry elephants, and he just spent months and years, and he would stay in the Land Rover and drive out to where they were in the bush in his 5,000 acres and talk to them. It's okay. No one's going to hurt you. You're safe here. In English, looking at them. It got to the point where the matriarch would charge and then stop. And if she kept going, she would have knocked him in the car right over. And then pretty soon she stopped charging. And pretty soon he got out of the Land Rover and he stood there. And pretty soon he walked a little bit closer until they all became friends. And basically they trusted him. And they came to his house with his wife and they trusted him. And then more elephants were added. And then 2 things happened. One is he was in Durban and his wife, Francois, noticed that he was coming home at 5 and the elephants were starting to come out of the bush all of a sudden at that time. And they were coming to the house as if they knew he was coming. Then he called and said the flight was canceled, and the elephant stopped and turned around and went back into the bush. She noticed that and told him. He died away from the game refuge. The next day, all the elephants came and surrounded his house. And then a year later, exactly the same time, they went to his house. There's that book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? Usually we think our intelligence can understand the intelligence of other species and creatures. And that is really, really questionable. Why would our intelligence be so superior to understand the intelligence of a gibbon or an elephant, a flycatcher? What we're discovering is that there's incredible intelligence in these creatures and communication. And there's 3.4 trillion creatures on the planet who are communicating every single day. That's where we live. And so I think part of what that's a very white colonist thing to say. I tell people avoid first person plural. But What the world deserves, actually, is to know where we live. We don't know where we live.
Yeah.
And then to know who we live with. And that's what you're talking about. You will come to tears if you start to understand, like Lawrence Anthony with the elephant, if you start to understand the empathy, the beauty of this planet and the mantle of earth and what's going on. And then you begin to mourn, what have we done?
Yeah.
What science books did we read? How do we get so separate from it, so distant from this miracle of life? And it is a miracle. And if you're going to be here, why not be part of the miracle?
I feel like so much is new, so much is this understanding. I'm 67 and I feel like I have been a reader and aware of things, but my whole life curious. It could be that there's some things I just haven't heard of, but it seems like this knowledge of this interconnectedness, for instance, the communication amongst plants and particularly trees, and Suzanne Simard's book about the mother tree and how that translates into the soil, the communication in the soil. Talk about feeling emotion when you understand that trees communicate with each other and care for each other and will even warn each other of danger. Trees are a community, and trees are a community across the globe in a way. There's connectedness over huge areas. And is all of this, in your experience, Paul? I mean, you've been doing this stuff a long time. It's very old information. We as humans, modern humans, have forgotten it. The remembering of all this, I feel like, is happening over the last couple of decades. Is that way off?
A lot of things there to unspool. One is that we have to be careful of we again,
Yeah.
because we is really
Who is we?
and then other people are other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Othering.
So I remember somebody saying to me when I used that word, who's we? You don't speak for me. Simple, not negative or confrontive, just saying, you don't speak for me. So that came from that colonist settler mentality, which of course suffused the whole world, and really created the economic system we have today.
Is it more recent in collective consciousness about the remembering how connected we all are, the intelligence of things that we might not understand, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. There's 5,000 indigenous cultures. We haven't really spent much time learning what they know, understanding and speaking the language and understanding how they see the world. So I don't know what we've lost. I don't think anybody knows what we've lost or what remains in terms of this understanding of the living world. It's easy to imagine, if not know, that if all you had, and you talked about the Yupik woman who lived on the Bering Sea, and she was sitting next to me on a plane to Alaska, and I wanted to know what it was like to live there, because it's cold and ice and wind and sparsely populated, to say the least. She described it quite beautifully, but she also mentioned, almost as a matter of fact, that they could predict the weather 2 years in advance, which was very helpful for them in terms of what to stock and how much fish to put away and dry. I stopped her and I said, 2 years in advance, wait a minute, to explain. And what she explained was this exquisite, detailed observational knowledge they had about their environment, about when the ice froze, when it didn't, what color was the ice, how black was it, what was its extent, what was the fur, the velvet on the caribou horns, what was it that year and when, and on, the types of snow. Obviously, they did this because that was the world they inhabited. Of course, there wasn't TV and the internet to distract them. That was their world. And so, it is all pattern recognition. They just saw patterns, and you got this pattern, then this happened over there. I'm not saying it wasn't extraordinary. It is extraordinary, but it's what happens when people actually connect to where they live. And not only connect, but then they pass on that information. The information, knowledge goes to, it's generational. It's not individualized. And so how can we, as, overeducated white people and others too, get back in touch? And to that point, there is an explosion in science right now. Karen Bacher, The Sound of the World, unfortunately passed 2 years ago, but wrote a beautiful book on that. Zoe Slanger, The Light Eaters, 8 years in studying the cutting edge of botany and plants, what you spoke about. And there's just this all over bioacoustics and studying, the sounds of the world and what's being said. We understand now that mother bats speak their own dialect of motherese, and they name their children and, and more, and we're just being awestruck, I think, on a daily basis. You're looking at the panoply of science is coming out about this, the realization of what an intelligent, extraordinary world we live in, and it's not just our intelligence.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing moment. It's the most brilliant period in human history. It's one of the most stupidest times in human history. But they're both true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I would love to hear you talk more about that, because I feel like it's both very hopeful and just very just discouraging and sad and tragic. I mean, how can it be both things? I mean, we live in a world of polarity, so that shouldn't be a surprise. But I want to hear more about how this is the most brilliant moment in human history.
Well, the science is exploding, keeps exploding, and what happens is science is an establishment, and to keep your job at the university and to get tenure and all that sort of stuff, you need to be peer reviewed. Okay, your papers, you got to publish or perish. We've all heard that statement. Well, it's for real. How do you publish? Well, you don't just do a paper. You've got to get it peer reviewed. Well, who are the peers? Well, your colleagues. They're the scientists that are clinging to old paradigmatic ways of seeing the world. And so you have to you can't get too far away from that if you're going to survive as a scientist and so forth. So this is, Zoe Slanger talks about that in Light Eaters, about plants, and saying that off the record, they won't publish this, but botanists will say the only way we can understand a plant is that the entire plant is a brain. In other words, all these things we know about plants, in their 20 senses, we have 5 senses that we will never have, abilities to perceive and comprehend, and information and observation of where they live, which is always the same place, is such that we can't explain it. We can't explain what they do. Like you mentioned, the trees, the pheromones that they emit to protect other trees from infestation that may be affecting them, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, just the connectivity and community. It's a community. And all life is a community. Your cells are a community. But that's why I say it's the most brilliant time, because there's just a raft of new, young, brilliant men and women, scientists going out there and discovering things that are blowing our minds. And I mean, you could say they're discovering, a kind of sensibility about the world that was innate to indigenous cultures. I mean, there are 7,000 cultures on this earth, and this is good dirt, but it's not really dirt, in the etymological sense, and all 7,000 cultures call the earth Mama, Mother Earth, without exception.
Yeah.
Without exception. Okay. Exactly. It's the source of all life. Everything you have. I don't care whether it's your iPhone or or your washing machine or your breakfast. It comes from the earth. Without which there is nothing. And so we've always understood the matrix, that is the source of life. And so I feel like instead of the science coming out of Western European traditions, that is really much more about getting, taking, finding in order to get more, take more. Darwin is an exception to that, but is really, really transforming very rapidly. Susan Samar's work was criticized, and there's one aspect of her work that has been disproven, but the basic understanding that she was putting out into the world is absolutely true, which trees are a community and they take care of each other. And in ways that, we can't understand that in our framework, because it's like impossible for, a tree of all things, to be altruistic. Well, trees don't use that word.
Right.
So again, it's projection and then saying, well, that's not possible. Okay, but well, where did that word come from? And what do we think it means? And so, yeah, community, I think we can project, and it holds true right across from a cell, to a forest, and soil and everything else. But most of the language we use actually is circumscribed by where it was derived from.
As explained in your chapter on parlance, about how language affects our understanding and our feelings and our cultural differences and how we use the language. And I think Suzanne Samard is just a really great example of a scientist that's trying to introduce to the world these ideas that don't match up with our rational idea of things. This sort of, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist kind of thinking in our modern materialism, right? But I just feel like maybe I'm growing up and getting exposed to more things, but I'm hearing, I just feel like there's more and more of that. And for me personally, the way it opens me up more than my mind hearing about it is through emotion. Like, you hear about those trees and you hear about those fish, and you realize that, wow, there's sentience there, or a type of sentience at least. Might not be this, again, language might not be the sentience that we think of as like an animal or another human, but there's life there that is responding and reacting and observing. And it's profound. Indeed,
Have
profound.
you listened to the telepathy tapes, Paul? That podcast? I think you would like it.
Yeah, I think you would.
It actually, the first week or so of January surpassed Joe Rogan. It's catching quite a bit of attention, but it's about this scientist making a documentary with kids with nonverbal autism and their telepathic abilities. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the first episode. It just
Right.
goes
Yeah.
on and on. It's all about the collective consciousness and what these kids with these amazing abilities know that we don't, that for so long we've just thought, again, the collective we, that for so long these systems have blocked them out of school and things like that, because there's just this assumption that because they can't talk, they must not know things. And it's really, honestly, paradigm shifting.
Yeah, there's two beautiful books by, I put quote marks, autistic people. Camilla Pang, Becoming Human. In other words, she had to learn how to become a human being, because the way her mind worked and what she said after was thrown back in her face. And like so many very functional autistic children, they felt, marginalized and criticized and mocked and all that sort of stuff. It's a beautiful book. And then Dara McNulty, McNulty, on the Diary of a Young Naturalist in Irish. And again, just being mocked and made fun of and humiliated in going to public schools. Read his book. He is a brilliant, brilliant naturalist. It doesn't get into paranormal or that, just his ability to see the world, the same world you and I would see, standing, on cliff looking out over, the ocean, the birds, or whatever, and so forth. It's just so beautiful to read. And he won the Wainwright Prize for the best naturalist book in the UK for when it got published. But yeah, I will definitely go to the telepathy thing. I have heard about it, but I just haven't had time to go. But I just think that when I say it's the most brilliant time in human history, is that I think on the Western side, which is where AI and all these other ideas of artificial intelligence are rising, but on the Western side, there is a sense of the possibility in terms of intelligence that was not countenanced up until now. And gosh knows where that's going to go and how far or fast will it extend. It's quite beautiful, I think.
Yeah, and I predict that if you do listen to the telepathy tapes, that you won't be surprised. I think you'll hear things that you'll think, yeah.
I'm curious, without doing a whole other podcast, something that I'm thinking a lot about, as are many of us recently, is AI and the rise of AI. And I just wonder what you think about all of it, and sort of what role. I mean, there's no way to turn back, I guess, where, AI is here. So what do you think about that, and how to proceed responsibly, like in relationship with this
Well, first of
thing?
all, by definition, there's no such thing as artificial intelligence.
I love that. That's so true.
I mean, I'm not saying that the technology doesn't exist. Of course it does.
Right, but it's just intelligence.
I'm not sure about that either. Because we don't have a definition of intelligence. And so it doesn't mean it is or isn't. It just means that, well, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
But where it's going and to what end and so forth, I have no idea. I'm just like agog, just like everybody else as to.
Yeah. In the circles that I'm in, it's always a very hot topic because of the toll that the data centers and the cooling of the servers contributing to global warming. I mean, that feels so far out of my own personal realm of control. I feel so removed from that it's going to happen no matter what. I don't know. You have
Yeah,
any
well, I
feelings?
mean, I was at a thing in Palo Alto, and the head of AI at Google was on the panel, and and somebody asked him about that too. Like this huge increase in energy required to run the server farms, and he said something I've heard again and again. Well, AI is going to help solve climate change. In other words, which
Could be
is
fixed.
so charmingly naive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because climate change is caused by consumption, and nobody talks about consumption. And so Ed Conway wrote a really interesting book. It's on materials, and I think the first chapter is on copper. And without copper, there is no world as we know it. There is no AI, no server farms, no EVs. There are no batteries. There are no homes. There are no grids. It's so ubiquitous that we don't even think about it. Okay. So to achieve net zero, he did the calculation because he went to the Chuquicamata copper mine, which now is the second biggest in the world, and it's the deepest hole in the world. It's moved more earth than any other mining operation. It has trucks made by Komatsu in Japan. The tires for the trucks are 2 stories high. The tires. And they have to go all the way down here and get all this ore, bring it back up, 600 and some odd tons in one vehicle, and then obviously refine it. And they have a settling pond for all the arsenic and stuff that comes out besides copper that's bigger than Manhattan. It's only 25 years old because they never did it before. They just put it out in the desert. Okay. And so that's the Chuquicamata copper mine. In order to hit net zero, we would need 2 or 3 more of these mines every year for 25 years. Not possible. So there's a whole aspect of these aspirations, about, what we can do, what we should do. And I mean, I have a phrase from that Irish joke is you can't get there from here,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying what you want to do is bad or good. I'm just saying it's physically impossible,
Mm-hmm.
biophysically impossible. Uh, and there's a lot of those. Direct air capture is
Mm-hmm.
another technology that's being bandied about, which is you suck, the atmosphere, take out the carbon, liquefy it, pump it somewhere into geological formations. Okay, we can do that. But if you remember our physics, which most of us had to study at one point or another, um, there's a concept of entropy, which is energy is a one-way road. It doesn't go backwards. And so when you burn coal, gas, or oil, you have ash or you have a waste. That's entropy. You can't take the waste ash of a coal-fired plant and then turn that back into coal. That's the first and second law of thermodynamics. And so what DAC is doing is saying we have all this entropy in the air. It's called CO2. Okay. And we're going to suck it down and we're going to use energy to change that entropy into and liquefy it or use it to pump it into depleted oil wells to get more oil, which is even more bizarre. And so you can't fix entropy with entropy. This is like, I don't think it's even fifth grade science. Okay. I mean, and yet it's attracting billions of dollars of investment.
Mm.
And we'd have to have 20 million direct air capture machines going 24/7 until the year 2100 to achieve 1.5C. And where would they be powered? Oh, with renewable energy. Well, renewable energy, it has a footprint too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is what's going on, this is the narrative that's coming from big business and corporations and so forth. And I just think that what you guys do, what's a better word than guys when I'm talking to two women? I don't want to say
Gals?
gals.
I don't know.
Gals sort of is a little bit,
You people. Y'all. We're from the South. We say y'all.
y'all, what y'all doing it? But I'm saying is a part of remembering,
Yes.
because I don't think there's anything. By the way, I'm very happy to be, an XY chromosome on your podcast because there's very few of them. But
We're glad you're here.
yeah, but it's really about remembering. And
Yes.
and like Sebastian Younger said, about a child owns nothing, but a child knows so much. And I mean, and we have to dismember what we think is true and remember what's right in front of us, including our relationship to not only each other, but every other living being.
So I'm sitting here listening and absorbing our conversation. And after having read your book and listened to the telepathy tapes and just sort of a lot of things that have been happening lately, I have a new grandson.
Mm.
Just life is giving me all these opportunities, I think, to open up my heart. And I'm sitting here thinking maybe what we all need is to be heartbroken at what's going on, like really feel it. And then the needle starts to turn in the way we think and behave and interact with each other. And your book is very heartbreaking in a lot of ways. You read it and you think, oh, I never knew this. And I feel a sense of tragedy as I'm reading it. But at the same time, or sort of processing through it, through the narrative, I feel very empowered. Somewhere towards the end, you say, I wrote this down because I thought it was really, really impactful. You say, the failures of politics and society are an invitation to reimagine each other within the living world. So I think the reimagination is a huge piece of it as well. And to reimagine means we do have to deconstruct our ideas of things. We do have to just sort of collapse these concepts that we grasp so tightly, that we have to make money and the economy has to grow and you have to grow up and get a job and do all this stuff so that you can have a house and all the cars and these concepts that are kind of driven our culture. I think we would do well to kind of soften our grip on some of those a little bit and let ourselves be heartbroken, see the tragedy, and then take that as an opportunity, in your words, to reimagine each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, every single person is going to die. And when they die, nothing that they experienced yesterday in Washington, D.C., and where they sat and with whom and who they met and how much money they're going to make will mean a damn thing.
Right.
Nothing at all. So for me, why not start now? Get a head start on what is inevitable. And the beauty about grief, which is what you're describing, just that sense of loss, and it is heartbreaking. Okay, I'm not sure that's the right word, but what I see is that grief is so important to feel. It's so necessary. It's so beautiful, because grief can only come from the heart. It doesn't come from muscles or biceps or concepts or TikTok. It comes from your heart, and the heart is the whatever it is. It's not just an organ, but the heart absolutely always tells the truth. It cannot lie. And so it is our madre, it is our mother, it is our guide, it is our North Star, whatever you want to call it, and so forth. You can trust your heart. And you can also shut it down.
Yeah.
So it's your choice, it's your life, And I feel like, I read news every day, and I get just as dispirited as anybody else, and maybe more so. I mean, so it's not like I'm immune to that, but at the same time, this is what it's about. It's about building connections, building community, sharing, understanding, listening, and to each other and the living world. And it's there for us. It's our, like I said earlier, madre, it's our mother, and it loves us dearly.
Thank you for writing this beautiful book that allows all of us to experience this discovery and awareness and the grief and then the hope of realizing that each of us in this moment can turn and listen to our hearts and do whatever feels like the thing we need to do.
Yeah, I'll add too to say, I think you're right, Mom, in that people need to be heartbroken in general, be able to heal, and that's how we'll reimagine. But I think to what Paul was saying earlier in this conversation, that makes me feel fear, like, oh, I don't want to be heartbroken. And then if we're saying that fear isn't the way to get people to listen to or pay attention to. So you said the word discovery, and I like that a lot better. I'm excited about discovery, and I'm excited about learning things and to almost to figure out what I've been missing out on, like these sweet fish who know us so well or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that makes me excited, and that makes me want to engage. So that just sort of clicked for me. Like maybe it's about discovery, and it's about sharing that with each other.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful quote in the book from Bayo Akamolafe, a Yoruba poet, almost the last line he gave in a commencement speech at the Pacific Graduate Institute here in San Francisco. He said, at the end, he said, whatever you do, from this point on, please do not try to save the world. which has startled them after the whole speech. Like, what? And he said, think and imagine that the world is here to save you.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to wind up.
Yeah.
I think so too.
And I have all of these things I wanted to ask you about from the book, but we'll have to talk again. Yeah.
This book is out March 18th, which this episode is airing March 14th. So you can get it next week. And yeah, anything else you want to say, Paul, about how folks can follow your work or just buy the book or?
Yeah, I'm not very good at social. I'm not on Substack. I'm not on Instagram. And so I don't try to have a high profile out there, sort of kind of competing for attention. So the books are where I say offer, to others who would like to collaborate, because of writing and reading is a collaborative process. But this book is really just an extension of my life in terms of blessed unrest, natural capitalism, drawdown, regeneration. And it all comes from something you mentioned, which is this intense curiosity about the world, and I'm just fascinated by it. Even it's going flying off the rails like it is right now. And again, I said earlier, where do we live? I don't know where I live, but I know more and more about it. And it just creates a sense of deep, deep, deep gratitude and appreciation. And so I hope the book provides a sense of joy as to where we live and how things are going on there that maybe we don't understand, but which, if we did fully, would make us even more joyous.
So wonderful. Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.